The storm began long before the rain touched the ground. A slow build of tension inside the Miller home that no one wanted to name. And even though the house looked peaceful from outside, calm lawn, neat porch, warm lights glowing through the windows, inside it felt like everything was shifting without warning, turning into something new and heavy. Ethan Miller felt it first, the soft changes in the air, the uneasy quiet after dinner, the way his mother's voice grew thinner each time she tried to sound cheerful, his father's footsteps growing quicker and louder, like he was always trying to get somewhere else, somewhere far from them. Ethan was 19, old enough to understand what silence meant, but young enough to hope things could still get better. He lived with his parents in a small Michigan suburb, a place where everyone knew everyone, where people watered their lawns in the evenings and waved at passing cars, where families were supposed to stay close, but his own family felt like three separate islands drifting in different directions, and he sensed that the space between them was getting bigger every day. Laura Miller, his mother, used to be the heart of the home, gentle and patient, someone who turned small moments into warm memories. She loved cooking slow meals, decorating the house with soft colors, and sitting on the porch with Ethan during the summer, laughing at the sound of cicadas echoing across the street. But over the last year, something had dimmed inside her, as though a piece of her light had vanished without anyone noticing. Ethan saw it whenever she pushed her hair behind her ear a little too quickly, whenever she held a mug with both hands like she needed it to stay steady, whenever she watched the door waiting for Richard to come home, hoping he would walk in with a smile that never appeared. Richard Miller was not a bad man, but he was a man who forgot what mattered. He worked long hours at a logistics company, climbing his way up through sharp words, strong decisions, and endless meetings. He believed he was doing what he must for his family, but he never realized he had drifted away from them, step by step, choice by choice, until he no longer knew the people he came home to. He missed dinners, birthdays, quiet nights, small jokes, gentle touches, and the things his wife and son kept trying to give him, and because he did not see the loss, he did not feel it. Ethan often wondered how his father could be so smart at work yet so blind at home, how he could solve complicated problems with confidence but never notice his wife wiping her eyes while washing dishes, never notice Ethan sitting alone on the porch waiting for someone to join him, never notice the cracks forming in their lives. The dirty secret did not begin with drama or betrayal, it began with hurt, the kind that quietly piles up until it is too heavy to hide. Ethan found himself slowly becoming the person his mother leaned on, the person who listened to her when she needed to talk, the person who calmed her when the house felt too cold, the person who filled the empty spaces his father never noticed. They had not planned for their bond to grow. It simply happened, shaped by long nights, shared responsibilities, and quiet moments when they both needed comfort. It became a secret only because Richard never paid attention, because he never asked questions, because he never wondered why his wife and son grew closer while he drifted farther as if carried by a silent current. One rainy evening, everything shifted. It was the kind of rain that made the world feel smaller, tapping against the windows, soft but constant, filling the house with a steady sound that almost felt like whispering. Ethan walked into the kitchen and found his mother sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug, steam rising slowly, her face pale from exhaustion rather than sickness, her eyes fixed on nothing at all. He knew something was wrong. Before she said a word, she looked up at him with a quiet ache, the kind mothers try to hide but cannot fully cover. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked gently, pulling out a chair, sitting close enough to feel her shaking breath. She tried to speak but her voice broke, and the moment it cracked, her guard came down, her eyes filled with tears that seemed to fall too easily, like they had been waiting at the edge for weeks, months, maybe longer. "I don't think your father sees me anymore," she said in a voice so small it hurt. "I don't think he sees us at all." Ethan felt something inside him twist. Not anger but a sharp sadness, a deep ache that came from watching someone he loved suffer quietly for too long. He reached for her hand, warm but trembling, holding it the way she once held his when he was young and afraid of thunderstorms. "Mom, I see you," he whispered, and when her tears fell harder, he tightened his grip, wishing he could take the pain away with just words. Laura told him she felt alone in her own home, like she was living behind a glass wall where no one could hear her. She said she missed the days when Richard came home smiling, when they talked about their dreams, when they sat together watching old movies, when the house felt like a place of love rather than pressure. She said she felt like a ghost now, passing through rooms no one looked into, moving through days no one cared about. Ethan listened closely, every word sinking deeper into his chest. He never knew the full weight she carried because she always tried to protect him from it, always tried to smile even when her heart hurt, but now she was telling him everything, and he realized how long she had suffered alone. The rain outside grew louder, beating against the windows as if echoing her pain. The kitchen light flickered softly, and Ethan felt the moment become something he would never forget. This was the night their bond changed, not because they wanted it to, but because pain has a way of pulling people close when the world grows dark around them. "Mom, you're not alone," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I'm here, I'll always be here." She looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and grief, wiping her face with the back of her hand, her breathing slowly calming. "I'm sorry you have to carry this with me," she whispered, but he shook his head. "I don't mind," he said. "I'd rather know the truth than watch you suffer in silence." She smiled weakly, a sad smile but still a smile, the kind that held a trace of hope. Their shared moment tightened the invisible bond between them, a connection made from shared hurt and quiet loyalty, something Richard never noticed because he never paused long enough to see anything. That became their secret. Not something sinful, not something shameful, but something emotional, something that revealed how broken their family had become. A truth they never planned to share. A truth Richard would never guess existed. An intimacy of the heart, not the body. A quiet closeness born from the gaps Richard left behind. The storm outside grew stronger, lightning flickered, illuminating the kitchen in quick flashes. Laura placed her hand on Ethan's cheek the way she used to when he was a child, her voice soft but filled with meaning. "Thank you for being the one thing holding me together," she whispered, and Ethan felt his throat tighten, because he wished she didn't need to rely on him like this. He wished his father would step up, notice, care, love, but those wishes were fading in the rain. That night, as the storm raged across Michigan, Ethan realized that he and his mother were carrying the family on their shoulders, quietly, secretly, without help, without recognition, and Richard, who believed he knew everything, had no idea what was happening inside his own home. No idea how deep the cracks had grown. No idea that his wife and son had formed a bond he was no longer part of. And no idea that the truth was waiting, growing, expanding like the storm above them, ready to change everything once it finally broke through. The night ended with Ethan walking his mother to her room, turning off the kitchen light, and standing alone in the hallway, listening to the rain as it softened against the glass. He felt older than he was, heavier than he should be, more protective than he had ever been before. He knew their bond was now a secret, a quiet truth his father would never understand, and as he walked to his own room, he felt the first spark of fear that one day this secret would not stay hidden. Not forever, not with so much pain behind it, but for now. The house was silent, the storm was fading, and the truth belonged only to him and his mother, a truth that would change the future of their family, even if no one saw it coming. And Richard still walked through the house like a man who believed he knew everything, never realizing that the most important parts of his family were slipping out of his reach, inch by inch, moment by moment, night by night, while he left them alone in the storm, unaware of the bond forming behind his back, unaware of the tears he never wiped, unaware of the love he was losing, unaware that his family was moving into an emotional world he no longer belonged to, unaware that the secret was already alive inside the house he believed he understood better than anyone else, unaware that everything was about to change. The week after the storm felt like the ground under the Miller home had shifted, as if the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen even though no one said anything out loud. Ethan woke up each morning with the memory of his mother's trembling voice still echoing in his mind, her confession haunting him in every quiet moment. He walked through the house like someone watching for signs of danger, checking her face, listening to her breathing, noticing how she kept her shoulders tight like she expected something to collapse at any second. Laura moved around the kitchen trying to keep herself busy, trying to act normal, trying not to fall apart whenever she heard Richard's voice in another room. She set down plates with quiet hands, stirred her coffee slowly, avoided mirrors because she didn't want to see the tired woman looking back at her. She tried to smile when Ethan entered the room, but he saw the sadness hiding behind her eyes, and each time he saw it, a new anger began to grow inside him. A slow burn he didn't know how to put out. Richard, meanwhile, continued waking up early, rushing through breakfasts, leaving his tie crooked and his coffee half finished, acting like nothing had changed, like he still believed they were a normal family with normal problems. He grabbed his keys every morning with the same distracted energy, barking reminders about bills or chores, never noticing the strained silence that followed him out the door. He didn't see the way Laura leaned against the kitchen counter after he left, taking deep breaths just to stay steady, and he didn't hear Ethan whispering, "Are you okay?" as he put a hand on her back, trying to comfort her before his own day began. The house had become a place with two worlds, the world where Richard lived, busy, loud, rushed, and the world where Ethan and Laura lived, quiet, delicate, heavy with unspoken truths. Ethan tried to hold the house together with small things, cooking simple dinners, cleaning whenever his mother looked too tired, driving her to the store so she wouldn't have to face crowds alone, checking on her before bed because she had stopped sleeping deeply. Sometimes he found her sitting in the dark living room, hands around a cold mug, staring at the wall like she was trying to see her old life hidden behind it. He would sit beside her, not talking because sometimes silence said more than words. Their closeness grew stronger each day, not because they wanted that kind of bond, but because pain had forced them into the same small corner of the world, a corner Richard never even looked toward. One Saturday morning, the tension snapped in the smallest way. Richard exploded over something meaningless, a misplaced key, a forgotten receipt, something that didn't matter to anyone else. He raised his voice, sharp and frustrated, not shouting but loud enough to make Laura freeze in place, like her body remembered every moment of neglect packed into his tone. Ethan heard it from the hallway and rushed into the kitchen without thinking, his heart pounding with a protective instinct so strong it felt like it pushed him forward. He stepped between his parents, blocking Laura from Richard's anger without even realizing he had done it. "Dad, stop," he said, and though his voice shook, it carried something firm, something that made Richard pause, surprised. It was the first time in years Ethan had challenged him directly. Richard looked at his son like he was seeing him for the first time. But even then, he didn't understand why Ethan was standing there, why Laura's hands were trembling, why the air felt so fragile. He muttered something about people exaggerating, snatched the keys from the counter, and stormed out of the house, leaving the door open behind him and the cold morning wind blowing into the kitchen. Laura covered her mouth, trying not to cry, but the tears slipped through her fingers. Ethan turned to her, his voice soft, warm, the opposite of the voice that had just filled the room. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said, holding her shoulders gently. She leaned toward him, not fully, not dramatically, just enough to show how exhausted she was from carrying everything alone. "I don't know how much more I can take," she whispered, her breath unsteady. Ethan felt a heavy ache in his chest, an ache that only grew each time he saw her break like this. He hated how his father made her feel, hated how blind Richard was to all the pain he had caused, hated how long his mother had held on to hope, only to be left with disappointment over and over. He promised her again that she wasn't alone, promised he would be there no matter what happened, and she nodded, believing him because he had already shown her through actions, not words, that he meant it. That afternoon, the house felt strangely peaceful without Richard's presence, like the walls themselves were resting. Laura cleaned slowly, humming old songs she used to love, trying to rebuild a little piece of herself. Ethan helped her, talking gently, making her laugh once or twice, laughs that felt fragile but real. But what neither of them knew, what neither of them expected, was that Richard had returned home earlier than usual, parking his car at the end of the driveway because he had forgotten a file needed for a meeting. He walked toward the house planning to grab it quickly, maybe leave again before anyone noticed the brief visit. But when he reached the front door, he stopped, hearing voices inside, soft voices, not fighting, not arguing, but something else, something warm, something close. He heard his son telling Laura that she deserved better, that she was stronger than she thought, that he would always protect her. He heard Laura whisper back that she didn't know what she would do without him, that he was the one person keeping her steady. Richard froze, confused at first, then defensive, then curious as he leaned slightly toward the door, trying to understand what he was hearing. He didn't hear every word, but he heard enough to realize something crucial, something he had been too busy to notice. His wife and son were close, closer than he had ever understood, closer in ways he felt excluded from. He stepped back from the door, heart pounding with a mixture of shock and pride and something else he didn't know how to name, something that felt a lot like fear. For the first time in years, Richard realized he might not know what was happening in his own home, that maybe he had missed something important, something that had been building slowly while he was away at work, and he didn't know how to face the truth he had overheard. He didn't know if it was too late to fix anything. Inside the house, Ethan and Laura continued talking, unaware that the air had shifted outside, unaware of the man standing just a few feet away, listening through the thin layer of wood that separated him from the family he thought he understood. The bond between Ethan and Laura was growing stronger each day, shaped by shared hurt, shaped by years of being overlooked, shaped by the silence Richard had created. And as the sun moved lower in the sky, painting the walls with orange light, neither Ethan nor Laura realized that the secret holding them together was no longer safe, that someone else had finally seen it, heard it, and felt it crack the world he thought was secure. The day ended with the three of them in separate rooms, separate thoughts, separate storms, Richard quietly sitting in his car long after the sun went down, trying to make sense of the words he had heard, Ethan sitting in his room thinking about how to protect his mother, Laura lying awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer she could carry the weight of all these quiet truths. The house no longer felt like a home but a place filled with questions, fears, doubts, and secrets waiting to break open. And though none of them knew it yet, the next confrontation would change their family forever. The next morning rose with a strange stillness in the Miller home, as if the walls had overheard the tension growing inside them and were waiting for something to break. Ethan woke up with an uneasy feeling in his chest, the memory of his mother's tired eyes still heavy on his mind. He walked into the hallway expecting the same quiet routine, but he stopped when he saw Richard standing in the kitchen earlier than usual, fully dressed for work but not moving, not drinking coffee, just staring at nothing with a rigid expression. Ethan froze, because something about his father's posture felt different, less distracted and more alert, like he had finally turned toward the family he had ignored for so long. Laura entered the room moments later, tying her robe around her waist. Her face soft but tired, and when she saw Richard she paused, holding her breath the way someone does when they feel the air around them shift. Richard looked at both of them slowly, as if studying them for the first time, his eyes scanning their faces, their tiredness, the quiet understanding between them, the closeness he had never noticed until yesterday. "We need to talk," he said, but his voice held none of the sharpness it usually carried. Instead, it sounded uncertain, almost reluctant. Laura looked at Ethan, a silent worry passing between them, but Ethan nodded gently, stepping slightly closer to her. Not hiding his protective stance, Richard noticed it, the way Ethan stood near her like a shield, and something inside him twisted, not anger, but the painful realization that his son had stepped into a role he, himself, had abandoned. They all sat at the kitchen table, the morning light spilling across the wooden surface, and for the first time in years, the silence felt like the beginning of something instead of the end. Richard tried to speak, but words didn't come easily. He cleared his throat, looked at his hands, then finally looked at Laura. "I overheard you yesterday," he said quietly, and the words hit the room like a sudden gust of cold wind. Laura's breath caught, Ethan's body stiffened, but Richard didn't raise his voice or accuse them. His tone was heavy but controlled. "I came home early," he continued. "I didn't mean to listen, but I did." Ethan felt a pulse of panic rush through him, not because they had done anything wrong, but because their private pain had been exposed. The secret they had carried to protect each other was suddenly in the open. Laura swallowed hard, her hands trembling just a little. "What did you hear?" she asked softly. Richard's eyes softened with guilt as he remembered their voices, the quiet emotion, the exhaustion, the closeness born from hurt. "I heard you say you didn't know how much more you could take," he said, looking directly at her. "I heard him," he nodded toward Ethan, "telling you he would always protect you." There was no anger in his voice, only a deep sadness, the kind that comes from finally seeing what had always been there. Ethan stayed quiet, keeping his gaze steady, ready to defend his mother if he needed to. Richard leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I didn't know things had gotten so bad," he admitted, and in that moment the truth of it cut through the room, because a man who worked so hard to control everything had finally admitted he had lost control where it mattered most. Laura looked down, her voice thin. "I've been trying to tell you for years, Richard," she said. "But you never listened, you always brushed it off, always said you were busy, always said we were fine." Ethan watched his mother speak with a quiet strength he hadn't seen in a long time, her hurt finally rising to the surface. Richard ran a hand over his face, guilt washing over him. "I thought working hard would fix everything," he said softly. "I thought providing was enough." Ethan finally spoke, his voice controlled but firm. "A family needs more than money," he said. "Mom needed you, I needed you, but you weren't here." Richard flinched at the honesty, at the steady tone that didn't attack but didn't soften either. "You left us alone without realizing it," Ethan continued, "and she carried everything by herself." The words hung in the air, heavy but true. Laura placed a gentle hand on Ethan's arm to calm him, but he didn't stop speaking with Honesty because someone needed to say it and Richard needed to hear it. For a long moment, the house fell silent again, nothing moving except the dust floating in the warm morning light. Then Richard finally nodded slowly, painfully. "You're right," he whispered. "I failed you both." Laura looked up, surprised to hear him admit something so heavy. Richard's voice cracked as he continued. "I didn't realize you two had become this close because of me." Ethan corrected him gently. "We became close because we didn't have anyone else." The sentence hit Richard harder than anything else could have. He placed his hands flat on the table, breathing deeply, trying to steady himself. "I don't know how to fix this," he confessed, his voice sounding unfamiliar, stripped of pride. "I don't know how to be the man you need." Laura watched him with a complex mix of hurt and sympathy, because even though she was angry, even though she was tired, she could see the man she once loved sitting there. Scared, confused, trying for the first time in years, Ethan stayed quiet, letting his parents speak, but his presence reminded them both that he was part of this too. Richard turned toward Laura, eyes softening. "I don't want to lose you," he said. "I don't want to lose our family." Laura's eyes filled with tears, not from weakness but from the exhaustion of carrying years of sadness alone. "Then you have to change," she said firmly. "You have to show up, you have to listen, you have to care." Richard nodded, swallowing hard. "I will," he said. "I don't know how yet, but I will." The honesty in his voice felt like a small step, but it was a step they had never seen him take before. Ethan watched both of them, seeing something shift, something fragile but real. Richard turned to him, his voice quieter. "And I'm proud of you," he said, surprising Ethan. "You stepped up when I didn't, you protected your mother, you carried things I should have carried." Ethan didn't know how to respond, because he had never heard his father say words like that. Richard continued, "I don't want you to feel like it's your job to keep this family together anymore." Ethan looked at Laura, unsure, but she nodded softly, reassuring him. Richard reached across the table slowly, not touching, just offering. "I want to fix this," he said. "Not just as your father or husband, but as a man who finally sees what he ignored." Laura wiped her eyes, taking a deep breath that felt like the first real breath she had taken in months. "Then this is your chance," she whispered. The rest of the day moved quietly, gently, like the first warm day after months of winter. Richard canceled his meetings, staying home, helping with chores he had never noticed before, listening more than talking, watching his wife and son with newfound attention, not perfect, not suddenly transformed, but trying, truly trying. Ethan stayed near his mother, but for the first time he didn't feel like he had to carry everything alone. He saw his father stepping forward, step by step, awkward but willing, and that softened something inside him. That night, the three of them sat in the living room together, not talking about the past, not pretending everything was fixed, but sharing the same space with a quiet sense of beginning again. Laura leaned into the couch cushions, finally looking a little lighter. Ethan sat beside her with a calm he didn't feel before, and Richard sat across from them, watching them with a gentle determination in his eyes. The secret that once held the family in emotional shadows was no longer a weapon or a burden. It had become a turning point, a moment that forced them all to face the truth, not just the pain but the love buried beneath it. And as the evening settled around them, warm and soft, the Miller family felt something they had almost forgotten, the small fragile spark of hope, the kind that grows slowly but surely, the kind that changes everything if you let it.